Today is Saturday, October 13th, 2018, and we are at the Community Media Center in Westminster, Maryland. I am Don Warner, and I'm interviewing John Curran from Carroll County. And I believe you go by Jack.
That's
People
correct.
know you and your friends know. Well,
I
we're
don't
going
think anyone knows me as John.
John. Okay, Jack, you're a native of Baltimore County or Baltimore City?
I was born in Baltimore City, yes, and grew up there and stayed in the city until I went into service.
Right. And you went, interesting part of your story, you're in college, you didn't have to enlist, you had...
That's true. You've got to remember, at the time, it was a tremendous amount of turmoil. The war was escalating. You had to do something. I mean, some guys were able to stay in college, but there was so much frustration with the fact that you would have to serve sooner or later. As terrible as it sounds, I enlisted. I wanted to go into some sort of training like I wanted to study languages, so I enlisted to do that.
In college, what were you pursuing?
A business degree.
Business degree.
Yes, I had a business degree with minor in history and a minor in English.
Did you feel by enlisting that you were going to be pursuing your career start or education or
No,
nothing?
no,
You just wanted
a desire to get it over with.
because it was hanging over your head, so to speak.
Right.
You would eventually, in 2 years,
Well,
you
I
would
was
have
in
graduated.
for 4, but in the service for 4. I had about 2 years to go in college.
2 years to go in college. And the year that you enlisted,
It was June of '66, June 21st, 1966.
and you took your basic
Took
training.
my basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. I was intending to go to the Army Security Agency, and then when I was in basic training, they convinced me to go to OCS and become an officer. Interesting, just as an aside, the first person I met, the first military person I met, Sergeant Warnell, was actually the last person I met getting out of the service. I'll tell that a little later on. But I enlisted to go to the Army Security Agency, and then they convinced me, like I say, to go to OCS. So I went through basic training and advanced infantry training at Fort Dix. In November of '66, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, the 95th OC Company, figuring I'd become an officer. Well, that didn't work out. I was young, 20 years old, and the training was good, but I just didn't make it through OCS. A lot of turmoil, and I wound up getting dropped in. And I didn't drop out. I wound up basically, I guess you could say, failing out of OCS, and immediately got orders for Vietnam.
And your branch of the military was?
It was the Army. When I came out of OCS, it was 11F, which is reconnaissance. 11 Bravo's infantry, 11F is reconnaissance. I had a lot of good training in OCS. I got a little bit of time off, and then of course I left for Vietnam. And I had a brother-in-law who had some prior service. He was in Special Forces. He convinced me to, when I left for Vietnam, take a pistol with me. So I took a Browning 9mm automatic pistol. I mean, I know the policies now are ridiculous, but back then, you're talking 50 years ago. It was a whole different lifestyle back then. Didn't have any problems with it, just took overseas and when I got to Vietnam, it was a unique awakening, obviously. I got assigned to a reconnaissance platoon with the 2nd Battalion, 18th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Division. And of course, I had little bits of training and so on before I actually saw any kind of fighting. And luckily, very soon after I did get into combat, we overran a base camp, a VC base camp, and everybody knew I had the pistol. Everybody got a handful of ammo for me, so I had hundreds of rounds of Chinese Communist ammunition, which I fired right back at them when I had the chance.
You were start out by, in our pre-interview, you mentioned the M16. I wonder how many people know exactly what that problem was.
I don't think unless you served and actually had one in your hands, I don't think anybody really understands how severe the problem was. But remember, luckily I had this pistol. But the initial M16s that we were issued they malfunctioned. I guess that's a mild way of putting it. They jammed. And what would happen was your weapon you'd fire it, and the bolt would pull off the cartridge. But it wouldn't pull the cartridge out of the chamber, it would just pull off of it. It might make a couple of notches in the rear of the cartridge, it might rip the back of the cartridge off, but it wouldn't extract the cartridge. The worst case scenario, if it ripped the back of the cartridge off, it would force another round into that chamber and your weapon was completely finished. In my case, that never happened. I would take my cleaning rod and punch the shell out and put another round in and fire again. I wasn't the only one that had this problem. The whole division did, and it lasted for a good while till they made replacement rifles.
And the only solution was the one that you improvised on.
Exactly.
And you passed that around to others that
Exactly.
were carrying the same weapon.
But it did actually one time, it worked to my advantage. We were on an LZ, and we had surrounded a number of VC who were firing at us. And I'm getting off one shot at a time. I don't know what the other guys are doing, but I know what I'm doing, and I'm really petrified. We had an interpreter with us, and I'm getting off my single shots, and we're having a carbine coming back at us, and other M16s coming back. It was really a confusing time. But all of a sudden, in the din of all this battle, the VC wanted to surrender. They had a term they used, chu hoi, which is open arms. So here I am, a single shot rifle, and I have an interpreter with me, and he tells me what's going on. We stop shooting, and here they come out of the woods with their weapons raised. And it's kind of interesting. They thought I was a sniper shooting at them, getting my single shots off. It was a tremendous pleasure to go and disarm these two who'd been shooting at me. And I actually had the good fortune, if you will, because they surrendered to me. I got to take them back on the chopper, got a couple hours off, a couple days off maybe.
One of the people who are familiar with the Tet Offensive that we back home knew it was going on. You were there.
Yeah, we didn't, at the time, of course, when you're a grunt, you really don't know you only know what's going on around you. You don't know you don't know what's happening on the big picture.
What?
In fact, when the Tet started, I was actually at a base camp called Lai K. I had different duties at this time. I was a sergeant at this time. It was about 8 months after I first got there. I remember watching a Vietnamese woman walking down this road where we were on this base camp. I'm thinking, she's not supposed to be here. What is she doing here? And I'm cleaning my rifle, so my rifle's like open like this, and she's walking down the road, and I'm thinking, she's not supposed to be here. So I pointed the empty barrel at her, and I said, Dee Dee, and she took off. I didn't realize what she was doing. She was pacing off the distance for a rocket attack. And as it turned out, that was the start of the Tet Offensive. Again, I didn't know it at the time. So that night we had this rocket attack, and where my hole was, where my little bunker, I had a mini bunker, I mean, the rockets are coming in, the ground is just getting devastated. Luckily, I never took a direct hit. When I came out of my hole, everything was shredded. Everything. I mean, anything I left, when you're under a rocket attack, you take your weapon and you get into your bunker as fast as you can, and then you wait and see what happens when it's all over. Well, that night, the next day actually, I come out of my bunker, and everything was shredded. Everything was completely devastated. There were 5 dead snakes right around my little bunker, and I never saw a live snake the whole time I was there, but 5 of them right around my bunker. The ammo dump was hit, and stuff's going off everywhere. Quite a fiasco.
So, in reflection, that was the start of the Tet Offensive,
Yes.
as far as,
Yes, that was the start of the Tet Offensive.
and you comrades,
Well, see, I was kind of, I had a different position. I was like an expediter. I was, due to a knee injury, I got a much better job. I guess you'd call it a cush job. And my job was to make sure the choppers got to a certain location, make sure the ammo got to a certain location. I might have had to be at the LZ, calling them in and directing them to various things. I flew in the choppers. Oftentimes, if they had new pilots, rookie pilots, I would take my map and fly them around to the various locations while we were actually doing what we had to do, so they literally wouldn't get lost. Even though you have radios, I mean, you can get confusion. You can go to the wrong LZ. Somebody can pop smoke in the wrong direction and send them somewhere else. A lot of confusion in combat, a heck of a lot of confusion. But I guess if you say it's a positive thing, I don't know. I developed that rash that the Agent Orange produced. It's called a chloracne, right at this time. So I got another couple of weeks off.
So the timing of Agent Orange was following the Tet Offensive.
Yes.
That helps.
Timing of development.
All these things mean a lot to us who were back home because they were words that we're hearing on television.
Right.
And
They didn't know what it was. They didn't know what. I went to an aid station in the middle of a base camp, and your war's going on, the Tet's going on. They didn't know what it was.
it wasn't immediately linked to the chemical they were using.
No, it was not.
That was to defoliate.
Defoliate
cut-
the leaves, yes. I think when that rocket attack came, I think it disturbed the ground so much it might have released what was in the ground. I don't know, but that happened right after that.
The relationship to officers and so forth. What was your
Well, it was
the
pretty
leadership?
pretty good. Everybody knew that I had some OCS time, so that helped me run up in rank. I became a buck sergeant pretty quick, and I worked under a captain. His name was Richard Rogers, a really good guy. Didn't have much interaction with officers, but he was my supervisor, and we made sure that things flowed well to the troops in the field. Again, this is after my combat. He was a wonderful guy, had a bent finger like this. And so whenever he gave me something to do, I'd, yes sir, give him one of these. And there is one humorous story, I guess you could say. He and I we were headed to a base camp in a Jeep one day. And we were supposed to meet this convoy, and here we are in the middle of nowhere racing in back roads and with this Jeep. each of us worried, we're worried if we're going to get picked off by a sniper. But we never wore any rank. You didn't wear rank, not on your helmet. Sometimes you might have them up here, but we're driving along to meet this convoy, and here comes another little convoy. And it's some general with all these armored cars and all this stuff, and he comes doodling down the road and stops us. And of course, we don't have a rank, and we didn't even have our helmets on, but we had our weapons. We were ready. And he started to chastise us, and he looked at me and he said, "What's your rank, soldier?" I said, "I'm Sergeant Curran." "And who's this?" "Well, this is Captain Rogers." And he is scared to death. I said, "This is Private Rogers." And he was driving a Jeep. And of course, I was a better shot. That's why I'm driving shotgun. And that general says, "Don't you men know there's a war going on?" I said, "Yes, sir. We're the ones doing the fighting." And he said, "Carry on," and took off, and so did we.
You related to that in hindsight as humorous.
If you're doing your job, if you were doing your job, the officers, they didn't bother you. They knew what was going on. They knew how tough it was. They didn't bother you if you were doing your job.
So you would say that was the way, because the way you were fighting,
Yes.
it was.
And there's another thing too. The colonel of the unit, his name was Max Van Zelter. Of course, he knew me because I was in a reconnaissance platoon and we answered to him. But also, when I took over the job of expediting things to the field and out in the field, I might be out on an LZ working in the command center or whatever. It depended on what they wanted me to do. But he knew me. And very interesting, I was very fortunate. When I left Vietnam, he was on the same plane. His name was Colonel Max Van Zelter. He was on the same plane as I was. And I had orders to Fort Hood, Texas. And I said, "Look at this, Colonel Max. I got orders to Fort Hood, Texas." I said, "I'm going to Leavenworth before I'm going to Fort Hood, Texas." And he says, "Well, settle down, Sergeant." He gave me a card, a business card that he had. And he said, "I'll get you assigned anywhere they have an opening." And I lucked out. I got assigned to Fort Meade. And I got assigned to the 6th Armored Cav. Of course, I was an infantryman. And then when I got getting ready to sign in, a major from 1st Army Data Processing saw my credentials and whatever, and I didn't know it at the time, but I had a top secret clearance. That was all part of that joining the Army Security Agency. So I spent the rest of my tour, the rest of my military career, working for data processing, handling top secret documents, and I went back to Loyola College during the day and at night. And I graduated about a year after I got out of the service in 1970. I was very fortunate, very fortunate.
You come home, your tour of duty, you come home, what was your total tour of duty in
Well, I went
time,
over
sir?
in April of '67. I came back April the 5th, 1968, right when the riots broke out due to the murder of Martin Luther King. It was upsetting, but after having gone through the war, you expect anything. You really did. I expected anything, and I had 30 days off. My father and mother, and I was married at the time. My wife met me at the airport. I was supposed to go to Washington National, but because of the rioting, they diverted the plane to Dulles. So it was pretty safe when we got back. I never had any encounter with protesters like a lot of men did. It just never happened. I was, I guess you could say, very fortunate. Very fortunate.
So you come back considering you're alive, you didn't have a wound that was...
No, I had injuries.
Injuries.
No, I never was wounded.
And life back home was everybody was, did you think you were welcomed or?
Yeah, I had a job to do. I had time left in the military. I had a lot of responsibility in Vietnam, so I picked up with going back to school. Even when I was in the military, I went at night. Occasionally, I went during the day. I spent 2 years left in the military. Got out in 1970, and I graduated from college a year later. One other thing, though, I may have mentioned, I don't remember, but when I entered the service in 1966, the first person I met was a Staff Sergeant DI. His name was Warnell. He was tough, but he was very good. As I'm getting out of the service, the last person I see as I'm getting out is Staff Sergeant Warnell, and of course he didn't remember me, but I was a Staff Sergeant too. We were both the same rank, and people said, "Why are you getting out? You know, you made staff." They wanted to give me another strike, and I said, "No, I spent 4 years in here and a year in Vietnam. I'm not taking any more chances of going back to Vietnam. Not going to happen." I did make some changes though. I told my parents, my father at the time, we lived in Baltimore City. I said I lived in the woods for a year, and I did. I mean, literally, I lived in the woods. You didn't necessarily sleep in a little barracks. I slept on the ground, in holes or whatever. I said, I'm going where there are some woods, and I came up to Carroll County, and I've been here pretty much ever since. And I bought a patch of woods up on Fridinger Mill Road. That's where I hunt deer and cut wood and all that good stuff.
That's a unusual twist. You would think you wouldn't want to see more woods, but you adapted well in that. Oh, the whole year, and you had to adapt to
Oh, yes.
the you you came home and moved to Carroll County and got employed.
Yeah, I went to work for in construction. You know, young and restless. I went to work for a couple of contractors and did all the stuff: bricklaying, operate equipment, pour concrete, cut trees. I did it all, and to learn. And then, as luck would have it, right around 1980, I got laid off from one of the companies I was working for, and answered an ad in the paper. I went to work for Harford County government in the construction field. They were expanding the operation of their landfills, and it was a new and emerging problem, if you would, technology. So I went to work for them and stayed there for 4 years, and then transferred, got another job here in Carroll County doing the same thing. And eventually I made a career out of it, and 25 years doing stuff like that. Again, it was an extension of construction and things like that.
You affiliated veterans organizations?
Yes, I'm a life member of the VFW, life member of the Disabled Veterans, DAV, a life member of Vietnam Veterans of America, and a member of the American Legion. Spend time there. I have a lot of good friends there, and I go different places. That's a good thing about being a member of one of these organizations. If you're visiting another city, you can go to either VFW or American Legion, and the people are friendly, and they all have the same stories just like me.
So, family is.
Well, unfortunately, I was divorced. I have 5 children, 3 from my earlier marriage, and I remarried about 25 years ago. And I have 2 daughters, both of whom one is in college and one is working and going to college part-time. So, and I have 4 grandchildren. I actually babysit my youngest grandson, little Jaxie. He's a year old, and I'm his daycare provider. It's working out pretty good for everybody.
Wonderful. The what are you able to pass on to your children and say wisdom or insight? You've gained a pretty good insight of life, and
Yeah, I try to teach them to study as much as you can, learn as much as you can. I guess as ridiculous as it sounds, I've taught them all how to use weapons. They can all handle rifles and pistols. The girls, the two youngest especially, they're really good shots. I've taken them hunting, and it's I guess a form of self-defense, but it teaches confidence too. If you can handle a weapon, you get a little bit of confidence.
you know, we're coming to the close of our interview. You have some interesting props that we've talked about. You want to?
Sure, these are my dog tags, the original dog tags. I have rubber around them. They issued them this way so they won't rattle when you're running around on an ambush or whatever. And the unit I served in Vietnam gave us all cigarette lighters. I don't smoke, but this is the crest of the 2nd Battalion, 18th Infantry Regiment. And this is a .45 magazine. On my last ambush, you'd go out on lead ambushes. I was a buck sergeant. Went out on an ambush, and prior to that, I'm opening magazines for my .45. I had a .45 and an M16. And I thought, I may survive this. I'm going to save this and bring it back with me so I can tell people where it came from and how it came to be. Luckily, the ambush didn't get triggered. Other ones did. We were out with about 4 or 5, and some got triggered, but mine didn't. So that's the story. I'm pretty lucky.
Pretty lucky, very lucky. In your veteran activities today, you attend reunions, or you have any annual or biannual events that?
Well, I try to, right around Veterans Day, I try to go to different organizations and meet with people. A lot of my friends are kind of, they're combat guys. We just get together, we play a little bit of golf. I don't go to too many of the functions. I try to keep it low key.
Well, Jack, you've been very informative and very responsive here, and I know the folks who are going to watch your video are going to be quite impressed with your experience and your ability to recount. You want to add anything before we pull the plug here?
No, not really.
Okay.
There is one last thing though. Working with all the choppers like I did, built a tremendous rapport with them. And when my service in Nam ended, I mean, I literally would go day in, day out, and you didn't know what day it was. And I got a call on the radio say, hey, your tour is up. You've got orders to go back to the States. And so I called the chopper, the guys who used to haul me around. And when I called them, they came. And I said, I'm de-roasting, guys. I'm going back. Is any chopper that's in the area can take me? I'm up at Ly K. And I got a call back. And they said, yeah, wait on the runway. We'll be there to get you. And 5 choppers came flying in a big V and landed on the runway. And I got in the lead chopper, and down the road I went.
Okay. Well, Jack, if that kind of concludes our interview, and you've had the last say here, so I thank you kindly. It's Jack Curran, and I'm Don Warner, and on behalf of the Community Media Center, we thank you for coming out today.
Thank you very much for having me.